Welcome to Art with Mrs. Cap, where we are going on a journey through the world of art and the many histories and cultures that influence it. Whether you're a kid or a kid at heart, wanting to learn more about the art world, this is the podcast for you. So join us as we journey through art with Mrs. Cap. Happy Indigenous Peoples Day. So it's kind of fitting that today I'm talking about Cherokee pottery, and it also happens to be Indigenous Peoples Day. So we're shifting a little bit from how I normally do this podcast, where I focus on one work of art, and we're talking about an artistic style, just because that's the only appropriate way to do this. And to not just talk about one artist or one work of art. And often, when we look at Cherokee pottery or any kind of indigenous pottery or artifacts, you don't have records of artists like we do in some of our other cultures. And so to do justice to the work, I want to talk about it as a whole and not just individual pieces. So there's such a heritage for pottery in the state of North Carolina, which is where I am from and where I am teaching from. And there's just such a heritage and a history of pottery and so forth. And if you're not familiar with that, you can look up North Carolina pottery art. You can look up Seagrove pottery and all that kind of stuff. It's all right here in North Carolina. But we're focusing on the roots of that and the roots of our state's history. And that goes back to some of the earliest inhabitants here, which were the Cherokee. They were here before, Europeans came over and all that kind of stuff. And they were making art out in the form of pottery. And there's other forms of art, but that's what we're focusing on today, is their pottery. And so if you're familiar with North Carolina, we have a lot of clay. And instead of getting frustrated with the clay or whatever, because, it's hard to farm and do those kinds of things with clay, but they dug deep into the clay and they used it for a purpose. And so the Cherokee constructed pots and pipes and bowls and wedding jugs and all kinds of dishes that were used for storing things like storage jars and cooking pots and jugs and all that kind of stuff. Things that were more ceremonial or everyday. So, it just is this vast field of work. And thankfully, in places like the Museum of the Cherokee Indian here in North Carolina and at the National Museum of the American Indian in both D.C. and in New York City, we have a collection of works by Indigenous peoples. And it's really amazing to have the opportunity to go look at those things. So if you're ever in any of those locations, definitely plan that into your visit. It's worth it. So back to looking at Cherokee pottery, they had two methods that they typically constructed their work out of. One is a very, very, very simple process, and you've probably done this. You probably did this when you were younger with Play-Doh, but it's called a pinch pot. And basically what you do is you just roll a ball of clay into, into a ball. You roll it into a ball, and then you take your thumb and you stick it in there, and you just kind of squeeze and you pinch the clay into the shape that you want it to be. So that's why it's called a pinch pot. The other method that they would use was the coil method. And so basically you roll the clay into a long, almost like a rope, or like a snake kind of a look, and then you start coiling it. And as you're coiling it, you are building up, the walls and so forth, and you start to smooth it out. So you don't see those separations, but you use like a smoothing technique to smooth it out, to do away with the coil appearance most of the time. Now, there are some people that will keep that, but most of the time, that's how it's done. It's smoothed out. Then they would use like bone or broken pottery, or, other kinds of like wood and smooth stones and so forth to put designs on the surface, or to make designs on the surface of the pot. And then they would put it in a fire or a fire pit to fire it and to harden the clay so that when liquid was added to it, it wouldn't re-soften. And so that was just a technique that they used. And they were able to, because of the types of wood that they used, they would use soft woods like poplar, and it would create a thick smoke that would give the clay a dark black hue. So if you look at a lot of the pottery, it has like this blackish, kind of grayish tone to it instead of more of a clay color. And that was, achieved by the type of wood they used and the smoke that was produced in firing that clay. So this is just kind of an overview of Cherokee pottery, and older Cherokee pottery. So they didn't use pottery wheels, they used these two methods, and then they used this firing technique. A lot of contemporary Cherokee potters and artists combine those ancient methods with some of these more, modern techniques and designs to create, pottery that today is still prized and seen more as art than it is for daily use. But in ancient cultures, this was more for daily use and not as much for art as we see it today. And, that's how a lot of these things that we revere and look at as art from these ancient cultures, for them, it was just everyday objects, like taking a glass out of your cabinet that you drink your glass of milk out of, or something like that. To them, it was just everyday stuff. But to us, we see it as this beautiful art, and it captures this culture and this history that's so rich and vibrant that we want to make sure we preserve and carry on. And so that's what a lot of your artists today in the Cherokee culture are doing, is they're carrying this on. And there's actually a living history, like village and stuff in North Carolina, in Cherokee, North Carolina, where you can see artists who are carrying on those traditions, and they are doing like live demonstrations of this form of art and stuff, so that we can, see it in action and it's preserved for future generations. So all that to talk about Cherokee pottery today. So I hope you learned a little bit, something new maybe about your state, if you are a North Carolina resident or a former resident, or you are Cherokee maybe from, you descended from Cherokee, and you learned a little bit of something about your culture and your heritage that you didn't know. So thank you for joining me today, and as always, join us for another episode as we dive into the world of art. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Be sure to subscribe and check out more episodes as we travel through the world of art and art history to have a better understanding of our own ties to the culture and history of humanity.